So when a large organization makes a decision on buy, when they sit down with the integrator, potentially their integrator, and say, we want to look at specific technologies that will accept and that perform at the level we want it to perform and solve the problems we want to solve. So one of those thresholds is cybersecurity. So they have to make sure that whatever technology they decide on is cybersecure, that has the capabilities, right? So all these are baselines for acceptance. That's why it's such a responsibility for integrators to be at the level that they have to be at. Because without those questions, if they bring in technology that just doesn't hit the mark, it's a black eye on them.
Oh, yeah.
And this is why it's so critical. And I think that what it boils down to is this relationship between the manufacturer and the integrator has to become more consistent over time. And also, I think the consultants have a big challenge. They have to be more educated about technology. For many years, the consulting community has been very stuck on the risk and threat and vulnerability. Threat times vulnerability over countermeasure equals risk. Today, that's challenged because now technology has a big piece of that conversation. And if you don't understand technology, you create more threats and vulnerabilities, and you don't really ever get to eliminate risk. But I think it takes one step further, that if we can really understand the challenge of liability the right way, then we realize the technology and systems that we're using are there to eliminate liability. And that is where we're headed. That's why business operational use technology that can do that is so important. So that's a big dissertation, but that's kind of the visibility that I have. And I just, it's really important in this world that we're in right now that we really understand that technology is just not a security issue. It's a business issue. We've never really attained a true understanding of the value of risk. So I call it the rate of risk. There's a whole model behind it that we created for the IT industry. We realized one thing, right? So if you look at a graph, right, and you have basically at the bottom of that graph, on one side is the acceptable level of risk, right? And then at the bottom, it's time. So acceptable level of risk and time. We have to understand the current state. We have to identify what our client's current state is. And this is so important because then we begin to understand what are the requirements that we need to get to do to get them to a desired state as a client, right? So in most cases, for over, the beginning of time in technology, we dealt with the tactical challenges. We immediately did the assessment doesn't have to be done by a consultant. It could be done by someone who sells products or technology, but that conversation has to lead to understanding what are the challenges truly. Not, the question of most salesmen is, what keeps you up at night? No, don't ask that question, because frankly, everything keeps them up at night. So the reality is that it is the when you get down to the problems themselves and the challenges themselves, it could be institutional. It could be their culture. It could be certain pieces of their technology, not all of them, right? So knowing that tactical is critical, but it's not the tactical that's going to get you to the desired state, which is all the way at the top, right? So I say there's two things, there's two pieces. There's a tactical remediation you have to be aware of. But here's the challenges with just talking about tactical. And this is really going back to the hourglass. So we just talked about graph, but the hourglass, all of security lives in that bottom end of that hourglass. The problem is that if you live in that hourglass and only deal with the tactical, what ends up happening? You go round and round like a top. You never really attain an understanding of what it's connected to from a business perspective, because you're really not looking at the risk. You're really looking at the threat and vulnerability, right? So the challenge that we had many years ago when we developed this model, and again, 10 years ago at Secure State, the model was created to say, hey, unless you can connect the two, you'll never get it. That's why we always look at it from a converged approach. We look at every system, every organization is more converged than you think. And today it absolutely is. IT, physical security, operational technology, it's all combined. with people, process, and technology. Now, what the challenge is that when you look at this situation, you say, look, how do I get to that desired state? I need to have a strategy. I need to have a roadmap. Now, the only way I can get to the roadmap is I begin to understand what the business problems are and understand where that risk is in the organization. Once I do, because if I don't do that, here's what happens. I go down to a deteriorated state pretty quickly because I don't have the time, I don't have the money, and I don't have the resources because there's no reason. When somebody goes, you need 1,000 cameras, for what? I'm not paying for 1,000 cameras. You have to have a reason for that. Well, everybody in the press says we have to have, security cameras. That's not enough, right? So once we've evaluated that, we get to a desired state based upon the acceptable level of risk that one organization has. And I'm going to say all organizations are going to accept some risk, and some more than others. If you're in energy, you're going to have a very low acceptable level of risk. In retail, you may have more of an acceptable level of risk because you're not interested in becoming so secure. So once that happens, the key now is once you get to that desired state and you've done it, you've already really tied the two together, then you have an understanding of the run rate of risk. Because you understand, hey, what is my risk score? What is my business score in regards to how much I spend and what I do? And how do I lower that risk? And how do I stay there? Now it's really taking that, we call it check, act, plan, do. It's a reverse Deming cycle, right? Check consistently, act upon it, plan, and do. Repeat and rinse, and that's where your metrics come in. Metrics is hard to get to until you get there, because you got to get there to get models, right? Develop process. Now use of the people, the process, technology. And the last piece of this is governance. I have to have governance because I have to have policies that everybody's going to accept. What is the one key thing that changes everything in technology is culture. If culture is your challenge and you're trying to deploy technology to eliminate risk and liability, you may fail because they just say, no, we don't want to live in a friction-based access control. I don't want this to be difficult. And so the final piece is that once I understand that, then I can get to a more secured state. And that, trust me, it sounds, kind of hokey in many ways, but it's so true, right? And I'm trying to, guys, back at Secure State, Ken Stasiak, all those guys created that model, and we worked with that model. And honestly, it's still relevant today.
Do you think integrators today understand how to deliver this kind of conversation?
Pieces of it.
Yeah.
Pieces of it. They're not there yet. And I think the education of this is becoming more readily available. They're beginning to understand it. I think the convergence of the world, the allies of the world, Securitas of the world, realizing verticalization plays a role in this. They understand that they can't just deploy technology. They have to really see value in technology. All of them are talking about business use cases and how to really solve the business problems as well. So are they there yet? No. And as you get lower into the middle range of the integrators and the smaller integrators, that less and less knowledgeable of this. But I can tell you right now, and I'm going to talk to you guys, you've developed technology now that can get you to that business case, right? So the more you can do, and in the design, the better that you are in the outcome. The design and the form factor and the process makes it intrinsically available to get to a more secure state when it comes to technology. So it's just interesting. I adapted this model where it was now used in if you look at how we look at risk and liability. And I'm sure, some of the guys in Secure State will be laughing right now. Says, I can't believe he uses that model now. But it's funny because that model maybe is no longer applicable as much for IT anymore, but it's absolutely applicable to physical security. That's how, it's like that gap of 10, 15 years has now reached the shores of physical security technology.
I think the challenge for any large organization, whether you're, a business or a government or facilities or something like that, government organization, is understanding and thinking through a coherent process of what is my acceptable level of risk, but then also understanding, there's hundreds of solutions that can attack maybe a portion of my problem, but maybe not the holistic solution, or they may be able to solve certain kinds of risk, but not, when I put all of this together, the coherent or complete set of variables on the table, right? And so somebody has to spoon feed that answer and work through that discovery process with them, right? To really, hone in and sort of bubble to the surface, right? All of those unique threats and capabilities, right, that these technologies have today, both from prevention as well as what are new threats that I'm not even sort of contemplating, right? You talked about qubits, right? The news about Google. I mean, just thinking about the cyber vulnerability of something like that creates is pretty staggering, right? I mean, so I think it's an ongoing education process that integrators frankly have to lead, and consultants have to lead the industry forward from that perspective.
I wish we did a better job. Honestly, we're not there yet, and I don't know. I think that the biggest challenge we have, and I'm just going to say it outright, is legacy consultants who really just have chosen not to learn technology, not to be adaptive to the modern era of technology in the security space. And it's challenged then because end users or those using technology feel very, they use consultants to evaluate, what they should be doing, because many of them came out of guards, guns, and gates, and they just didn't understand, what technology is bringing to the modern world of risk and liability. And no doubt that there is a huge requirement and need to understand, defense in depth, but the defense in depth has changed. So let's just talk about AI for a second. I know everybody loves that. There's a little segment always about AI, but the reality is the development of the modeling of AI does not start from a foundational perspective. It actually starts from the problem, the outcome. So when you design or you create a specification for an outcome for a specific problem, it's a reversed engineered system in many ways. You have to know the problem before you can build the system. Before it was, let's build a system and we'll find an outcome. And unfortunately, that's not how the world works anymore. And that's when so when you have modern technologists, those who are infusing their understanding of technology into a legacy world, they begin to make people confused, and they start getting to the point where, look, you have to get away from this antiquated thinking, because it's not going to help your client. And if the clients are trapped in this bubble, or they go, I need to be more educated, but I'm going to the person who's supposed to be, an expert. Well, we're changing a lot of that. I mean, we're helping the consulting community as much as we can. And I think there are those in the consulting world that are more technology, and even, bringing technology to organizations like the ISPC, which is a great organization. ASIS has become more of an organization that understands this. So, look, are we there yet? No. But are we getting there? Yes. Again, it's like anything, right? People like the sages. They want the person who has all the answers. Well, those days, you can get a lot of your answers from a guy who's 25 years old, not 75 years old. So it's just a challenge. So I'm speaking about ourselves. I'm an old guy that has some wisdom, but I was reformed, basically, because I would have never taken this side of this pendulum if I hadn't gone through cybersecurity, okay? Because going through that was an awakening for me. And once I went through that, I realized, this world is much more dynamic. It's no longer it's not guns and gates. It really is the blend of technology. And I always say there's four areas of concern: secured identity, secured communication, secured entry, and secure cloud. Those are areas that have to be secure. And you have cameras and access control, all that stuff involved in those four. What's the one thing that trumps all of it? Culture. So I always say, if you don't understand that in your organization and you're not speaking to the culture first and just at least getting that straight, because what's acceptable? Are you going to accept technology? And having those conversations appropriately and then talking from the standpoint of technology and the use of it to lower risk puts you in a really good situation to have a clear path to using the technology needed. It's a great like conversation, my friend. It's something that I've been talking about for years and trying to persuade people to really understand. That's why I always say in the physical security space that we really understand cyber. The challenge is that's what a lot of integrators are attempting to become right at this point. So first and foremost, they have to be able to be competent in the technologies that can get them there. They got to be competent, right? They got to know that, first of all, the technologies exist. That's a good one. But second of all, they have to have the people that are actually trained enough to have that conversation. And I think that that's what, say, some organizations, some integrators are doing by being verticalized. So battle cards, we provide some of these things in terms of insights to becoming more an expert within each area. So, I mean, that's very important because from a perspective of business, you have to know what their business is. I oftentimes, it's really fascinating. You get integrators who walk into an organization and they don't know what the business does, right? And you're so far behind the 8 ball at that point because technology being used not only can, without the capabilities, first of all, to solve a variety of challenges that are baselined. There's that baseline requirement. If you can have that right off the bat, then you can speak to a series of verticals, right? That can solve some of those challenges within those verticals. But not understanding the vertical at all and understanding what the business problem is puts them in a big disadvantage. And I think that's why like Convergent has verticalized teams now. Allied is doing the same thing. Securitas is doing the same thing. They used to be specialists in, say, certain products, right?
Yeah.
But now I think they're specialists and teams in specific verticals. I think that's what's changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you absolutely have to have an understanding of the nuances of a specific vertical market, right? And so what's good for schools is very different than what's good for hospitality and very different than, what's good for stadiums and those kinds of things. So, and I think the set of tools you need to use to solve the challenges in many ways can be different, right? And so it's important to bake into your organization that versatility that, we have a process by which we are constantly vetting new technologies, constantly evaluating for whether these things will fit and are appropriate for our customer base, and whether they can push the boundaries of what we're dealing with, what are our risks today, and how we, what are the countermeasures and so forth to confronting those risks, right? And so I think that's also part of us, as a manufacturer, we think a lot about is, with that end user in mind, how could a camera be more than just a camera? It's like aspirational in some ways that, we build this thing and we're putting the device into that, but it's really just a sensor, right? And so, and then, with an IP address, well, really it's just a platform with a sensor. And so then, what if we added another sensor? Well, or what if we give you the ability to build multiple sensors down the road, right? And so because that gives us an entry point or a platform that you can springboard off of, well, now the possibilities are endless, right? And now you are not, you're not stuck at sort of, the day you sold the product is as good as it's ever going to be. Actually, the day you buy it is now an investment that can carry you forward 10, 15 years, and which you can continue to layer on more and more value that is vertically specific, right? And I think that is now the art of being a good manufacturer, seeing the matrix, and understanding where is this going to go 10 years from now, knowing that, listen, I may not have the answers today, but how do I set myself up so that you can deliver on the value and that premise over that time horizon as new technology comes out every day and as the ecosystem continues to evolve. And while we don't have a crystal ball, we can set yourself up for success, right?
Drop the mic. That's it. And that's true because here's the challenge. You can only do so much anyway. right? As a manufacturer, you can get to a certain point where you built a platform that allows for a lot of this to take place. You can evolve, and that's modernized technology, right? When you get to a point that you are now modernized and that you're prepared for the potential requirements. And again, look, end users are great at this, right? You show them something wonderful, you show them and they say, what about if you could do this? It's like, well, we're not there yet, okay? Or we don't have that yet. Good thing you asked, but they always want something else, right? It just always is natural, right? Doesn't mean they don't want it. It just means that they want something else as well, right? So, but that's the nature of it. Now, it's starting where you have a baseline that effectively allows you to get to that promise.